Hi Cycle World, this is Seth Richards. I'm in Los Angeles riding the 2021 Harley-Davidson Sportster S. You've seen the specs, you've seen the radical design departure, but today I rode it and I can tell you what it's all about. So the centerpiece of this motorcycle is the new engine. The Revolution Max 1250cc motor is a tremendous departure, of course, from the previous Sportster's engine. The first thing, as you let go of the clutch, you know how light the engagement is. It's really easy to use. The engagement point is neutral, so you can just get from stoplight to stoplight super easy. Part of the reason for that, in addition to the clutch feel, is the really great torque. From the very bottom, it pulls pretty smoothly. You know, maybe under 2,000 RPMs or so. It's a little bit jittery, but there's a just linear progressive power band all the way up to red line. In terms of throttle response, it's a little bit abrupt off and on, but once you get into the meat of the power band and you've got a little bit of throttle, it's really great. I think Harley should be commended for how well they've done with the way the engine feels and the sensation it gives. However, when we talk about Sportsters, we talk about those 45-degree twins that we've all known for the past 64 years or so. This is clearly not that. So the presence is very different. It has this great noise, it has a nice sort of thrum as you get on the gas, but it doesn't have that rumble. It's a very different experience. We're sort of trading the visceral Sportster now for this refined Sportster. It's really smooth throughout the rev range, it's really easy to ride, and you can feel that this thing in the Sportster guys has about 120 horsepower, 121 horsepower, and so it's ready to go. The transmission on the Sportster S is also really easy to use. It's really slick, positive engagement. I would say with the forward controls, you've got a pretty long linkage, and so there's sort of a long throw of the shift pedal, which isn't a big deal. I never missed a shift. It's a great little transmission, and it goes really well with sort of the refined feeling of the rest of the bike. So we have this great new engine, and it's in this new frame. It's a stressed member, and the chassis is really defines a lot about the riding of this motorcycle, right? So the form factor limits what it's going to be. So I found myself often really wanting to go for it because I have all this power, all this torque, but the chassis is really limited in terms of what you feel comfortable doing. It's really down to the form factor. So with 3.6 inches of travel in the front and 1.5 in the rear, you can really feel a lot of the bumps. You know, going over some bumps on the highway, I was out of the seat, and you know, it tickles the spine a little bit in not a terribly pleasant way. But again, that's what this motorcycle is. So it's not a knock against the motorcycle, that's just the type of bike it is, right? And so we have to keep that in mind. So the long wheelbase and the wide tires dictate the way this motorcycle handles. It's not this agile bike that you want to throw into corners like you would a sport bike or a naked bike, but it's really stable at slow speeds and at higher speeds. So when you're carving through the corners, you know, it takes a little bit of muscle, but it always feels composed. In terms of brakes, we have a Brembo equipment front and back. Brembo single disc does a good job in terms of feel, but in terms of outright power, if you're used to a double disc setup, it's just not quite as strong. So, you know, as I got to the bottom of the suspension travel and wanted a little bit more brakes, it just didn't quite have that much, but the feel is really good. So once you get accustomed to the bike and what it's able to do, it's a really good setup. So I got to sample two sort of riding positions with this bike. In stock form, it's feet forward, and I was able to try the mid-control foot pegs as well. So if you're not accustomed to riding with feet forward, it really locks you into place, and you can't really use your legs that much. So for some riders, maybe that's not their preference. For me, when I tried the mid-control pegs, I felt a little bit more in control, like I could engage my legs and use them a bit more, but in terms of ergos, it really sort of brings your legs up pretty high, and the riding position is then, you know, it's fairly committed on the bottom end, and your arms are stretched out pretty far. The seat is pretty comfortable for what it is, but again, in terms of long distance, you're not going to want to ride this all day, perhaps. So for me, the Harley-Davidson Sportster S is a massive leap forward on so many levels, but what it comes down to is how it rides. And the engine is a fantastic motor. Harley has done just such a great job keeping it exciting and refined and accessible. It's easy to ride, it's fun. I will say that it feels a little bit unfairly yoked between the chassis and the engine, because that engine just wants you to go, and you're held back a little bit by that form factor. But to me, Harley-Davidson didn't just do a little bit of a refresh here, they blew the whole thing up. And that they're doing it with this motorcycle as a Sportster is really significant, and it says a lot about who the brand wants to be in the future. And for me, the future is looking really bright.